Claire Dawson thought she knew every corner of her husband's life, until Michael vanished into the shadows of the dark web, joined a satanic cult and returned home with a ritual that marked her as the final sacrifice. Claire Dawson always believed she had built the kind of life people envied. Her days were filled with warm coffee in the morning, a husband who kissed her goodbye before work, and a quiet suburban street where how out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. Michael, her husband of 8 years, was steady, reliable, and well-liked by everyone who met him. He worked from home most days as an IT specialist, and while his job sometimes demanded long hours, it never seemed to disrupt the calm rhythm of their lives. Friends often remarked on how perfect they seemed together, and Claire would smile, feeling a quiet pride in what they had built. But perfection has a way of hiding things in its shadow. It began as little changes. So small at first, Claire barely noticed them. Michael, who had once been open about everything, started spending more time alone in his home office. The door, which had always been ajar, began to stay closed, and not just closed, but locked. When Claire asked, he brushed it off with a casual comment about work confidentiality. She accepted the answer without pressing further. He was in IT, maybe it was just company policy. Packages began arriving at odd hours, plain brown boxes with no return addresses, sometimes delivered by couriers she had never seen before. Michael always intercepted them, taking them straight to his office without a word. When she asked what was inside, he would smile faintly and say, "Just work stuff." His explanations were simple, almost too simple, but they were enough to quiet her curiosity for a while. The nights were the first real sign that something was wrong. Michael had always been a night owl, but now there were stretches of time when she would wake in the early hours and find his side of the bed empty. She would hear faint noises downstairs, the muted clicking of a keyboard, or the low hum of voices, like someone whispering through a speaker. On more than one occasion she found herself standing at the top of the staircase, peering into the darkness below, listening. The air would feel heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then she would hear his chair scrape across the floor, the sound stopping abruptly. Moments later Michael would appear at the foot of the stairs, his face calm, offering some vague explanation about finishing up a project. She told herself, it was nothing. People worked late all the time, people order things online, people lock their offices for privacy. There was nothing truly alarming, at least not yet. But then there were the changes in him. His smile, once warm and unguarded, became tighter, almost forced. His eyes lingered on her in ways that felt different, less affectionate, more studied. He seemed distracted during conversations, his mind somewhere else entirely. She caught him staring into space, his lips moving slightly as if reciting something under his breath. Claire began to feel an undercurrent of unease, but in the daylight it seemed foolish. After all, Michael still made her coffee in the morning. He still mowed the lawn on weekends. He still remembered her favorite wine, yet there was something in the air between them now. Something invisible but undeniable. Looking back, she would later wonder how she could have missed the signs, the packages, the late nights, the locked door, the way he seemed to be drawing further into himself, slipping into a world she couldn't see. At the time she clung to the belief that her life was still what it had always been, safe, stable, untouched by anything truly sinister. What she didn't know was that Michael's secret life had already taken root, and soon, the darkness he had been nurturing in the shadows would step fully into the light, and nothing about their quiet suburban life would ever be the same again. Michael's relationship with the internet had always been a part of his work, but now it had become something else entirely. Late night, when the rest of the neighborhood was asleep, he sat hunched over his desk in the dim glow of his monitor, venturing deeper into corners of the web most people didn't even know existed. It started with an invitation link he stumbled across in a buried forum thread, an address to a hidden site that promised access to the truths the world fears to reveal. The language was cryptic, the tone grandiose, but it intrigued him enough to follow. What he found was not what he expected. At first it looked like a private discussion board for obscure philosophy and alternative history, filled with posts about ancient civilizations, secret societies, and the idea that there was hidden knowledge powerful enough to reshape the world. But as the nights passed and Michael kept reading, the content became darker. Mixed among the harmless theories were threads discussing rituals, sacrifices, and something the members called the awakening. They spoke of shedding the human shell, transcending morality, and serving a higher force they referred to only as the Serpent. The group called itself the Serpents of Night. Its members hid behind usernames, but they spoke to each other like old friends, bound by something deeper than casual interest. They posted images of candlelit rooms scrawled with strange symbols, jars of dark liquid, and ritual diagrams marked with red ink. Some of the videos were shaky and grainy, showing hooded figures moving in circles around objects Michael couldn't quite identify. At first he only read. He told himself he was just curious, fascinated by the strangeness of it all. But the more time he spent there, the more the forum began to pull him in. New threads appeared that were locked to non-members, and gaining access required acts of devotion. The instructions were strange. Burn a symbol into wood, light black candles while reciting specific words, send photographs of the completed act to a moderator. Michael hesitated, but curiosity won. He performed the first task one night while Claire slept, burning a symbol into a scrap piece of wood and sending the image. The response was immediate. His account status changed from watcher to seeker, unlocking dozens of hidden discussions. These weren't just about rituals. They were about preparation. Members talked about cutting ties with the outside world, about loyalty to the group above all else, about performing acts to prove their worth. Some wrote about dreams that guided them, visions of standing in dark places surrounded by voices. Michael began to feel that he had found something important, something that offered meaning beyond the routine of his everyday life. The people in the group spoke with certainty, with purpose, and they treated him as one of their own. He found himself spending less time talking to Claire, less time thinking about work, and more time completing the increasingly strange assignments the cult sent his way. Weeks blurred together. His nights became a steady rhythm of tasks and messages, of slipping deeper into a network that demanded secrecy. He was told not to speak of the serpents to anyone, not his friends, not even fellow members outside the designated chat rooms. The cult's influence seeped into his thoughts, coloring how he saw the world. Everyday life began to feel shallow and meaningless compared to the hidden purpose they promised. By the time they told him about the in-person initiation, Michael was already theirs in every way that mattered. The idea of meeting them in the flesh didn't feel strange. It felt inevitable. The only question left was what they would ask of him once he stood inside their circle, face to face the darkness he had been chasing from behind a glowing screen. The weekend of the initiation came without warning. Michael told Claire he had been called away for an urgent work conference and would be gone for 2 nights. He packed a small bag with clothes, his phone and a few items she didn't notice. Black candles, a small knife and the carved wooden symbol he had kept hidden in his desk drawer. To her it was just another business trip. To him it was the moment he had been building toward for months. The drive was long and silent, his GPS guiding him far from the familiar highways and into winding rural roads. The farther he drove, the fewer houses he passed. Fields gave way to dense clusters of trees, their bare branches clawing at the winter sky. Eventually the road turned to gravel, leading him to a clearing where an old wooden cabin stood. Its windows glowed faintly, the only sign of life in the darkness. When he stepped inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke, incense, and something sour, like rotting leaves. The light came from dozens of candles placed around the room, casting long, lickering shadows across the walls. Strange markings had been painted in deep crimson, twisting symbols that seemed to writhe if he stared too long. The figures waiting for him wore long black robes and featureless masks, each marked with the same serpent emblem he had seen countless times online. They greeted him not with words but with a gesture, hands raised, palms out as if presenting themselves to some unseen power. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His robe was heavier, trimmed with dark fur, and his mask had small horns curling from the sides. Michael recognized him immediately, as the one who had sent the messages, the one who called himself the Voice of Night. Without speaking, the leader handed him a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a ceremonial dagger, its blade dark and gleaming, the handle engraved with more of the twisting symbols. The initiation began. The members formed a circle around Michael, their chanting low and rhythmic. It wasn't a language he understood, but the sound seemed to vibrate in his chest, pulling him into a trance. The leader motioned for him to kneel in the center, placing the dagger in his hands. One by one, the masked figures stepped forward, each pressing an object into the dirt at his feet. Bones, shards of black stone, vials of thick red liquid. Then came the final act. The leader drew a symbol on Michael's forehead using a mixture that smelled of ash and metal. The chanting grew louder, filling the small cabin until it felt like the walls themselves were red. Michael's mind swam with strange images, flashes of fire, shadowed figures, and something vast and serpentine moving in the dark. When it was over, the leader placed a hand on his shoulder and told him his devotion had been seen. But there was one more step before he could truly belong. The voice of Night leaned close, his words slow and deliberate, instructing Michael that his loyalty would be proven through an offering, a personal sacrifice that would bind him to the serpents forever. Michael drove home before dawn, the dagger hidden in his bag. His clothes reeked of smoke, and his eyes had a strange, glassy intensity. To Claire, he looked tired from travel. To Toe, he felt different, marked, claimed, and carrying a purpose that could not be shared. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew what the offering would mean. The question was not whether he could do it, but when the time would come to act. The message arrived 3 nights after Michael's return. It came through the encrypted chat room, a short string of words wrapped in code only members of the Serpents could read. He decrypted it slowly, the meaning sinking in like ice. The time had come. They were calling for his binding act, the sacrifice that would forever seal him as one of their own. The instructions were chillingly precise. The offering could be a stranger no one would miss, or someone whose loss would tear the fabric of his own life apart. The second option, they said, was the higher path, the path of true devotion. Michael sat at his desk staring at the screen long after the message vanished. He told himself he was weighing his choices, but in truth, the cult's hold over him had grown too strong for him to resist. The rituals, the secrecy, the promises of purpose, they had woven themselves into his mind so tightly that walking away no longer felt possible. The Serpents had given him something he didn't even know he was missing, and now they were asking for proof that he was worthy of it. In the days that followed, Michael became distant in a way that Claire could no longer explain away. He barely spoke at dinner. His eyes darted to her, and away again, as though he was studying her, wanting to be caught. She noticed things disappearing from the kitchen: a large carving knife, a roll of twine, a heavy cutting board. She found traces of melted wax on the basement floor, the faint smell of burnt incense clinging to the air long after he claimed he hadn't been down there. Claire's unease grew sharper each night. She began checking the locks before bed, listening for any movement once the lights were out. Michael's late-night sessions at his computer became more intense, the clicking of his keyboard stretching on for hours. Sometimes she thought she heard faint chanting through the thin walls, but when she strained to listen, it stopped. Then came the storm. Rain hammered the roof, and wind howled through the trees outside. Claire woke to a noise below, a steady, deliberate sound, like something being dragged across the floor. She slipped of bed, her bare feet silent against the hallway carpet, and moved toward the staircase. The flicker of candlelight glowed from beneath the basement door. She descended the stairs slowly, her heart pounding. The basement was colder than usual, the air heavy with the sharp tang of iron. In the center of the floor, Michael was kneeling, arranging a ring of black candles. Within the circle, chalk symbols wound into intricate patterns, and in the middle of them all lay a photograph of Claire, her smiling face surrounded by small objects she didn't recognize: stones, feathers, and something that looked disturbingly like bone. Michael's movements were precise, almost mechanical, as if he were following instructions only. He could hear. The sight rooted her to the spot. She understood, in an instant, that she was not just part of his life. She was the intended sacrifice. Her breath caught in her throat, but the sound seemed to cut through his trance. He looked up sharply, his expression unreadable, the candlelight catching in his eyes. For a moment they stared at each other, the silence thick and unbroken except for the patter of rain outside. Then Claire turned and bolted up the stairs, every step echoing like a gunshot in the quiet house. Behind her, she thought she heard him rise to his feet. The ritual was no longer a distant threat. It was here, in their home, waiting for its final step. Claire's hands trembled as she locked the bathroom door behind her, the storm outside masking the sound of her ragged breathing. She pressed her ear to the wood, straining to hear Michael's footsteps. For a moment, there was nothing, just the relentless rain pounding the roof, then the faint creak of floorboards below. He wasn't running after her. He was still in the basement. That was somehow worse. It meant he hadn't abandoned the ritual. It meant he still believed he could finish it. She grabbed her phone, dialing the police with fingers that felt numb. Her voice was low, but urgent as she explained that her husband had been preparing something dangerous, that she feared for her life. The dispatcher's calm questions were jarring against the adrenaline coursing through her body. They told her to stay where she was and keep the door locked until help arrived. Minutes stretched into hours in her mind, but in reality, the police were there within 20 minutes. The flashing red and blue lights lit up the rain-slicked street outside, and Claire's relief was immediate, but fragile. She could hear the muffled knock on the front door, followed by the officers announcing themselves. Michael's voice carried faintly from downstairs, casual and unbothered, as if nothing unusual was happening. When the officers descended into the basement, their radios crackled with sudden tension. Claire could hear one of them calling for backup. She emerged from the bathroom, her legs weak, and followed the sounds until she reached the top of the basement stairs. From there she could see the scene laid out under the harsh beam of a police flashlight, the circle of candles still burning, the chalk symbols, the photograph of her surrounded by ritual objects. The dagger lay on the floor beside it, its blade reflecting the light like a frozen drop of water. Michael stood calmly in the corner, his hands raised. He told the officers it was all a performance piece, a kind of experimental art, but the explanations faltered when they found his laptop, still open on a desk pushed against the wall. On the screen were dozens of files, videos of masked gatherings, step-by-step ritual guides, and private messages exchanged with members of the Serpents of Night. Some of the videos were worse than anything Claire had imagined. Dimly lit recordings of people kneeling in circles, others bound and motionless in the center, the chanting so loud it distorted the sound. Investigators spent hours in the house that night. They seized Michael's devices, the ritual objects, and the boxes of strange items hidden in his office. By morning he was in custody, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, possession of illegal weapons, and a list of other offenses that grew as the evidence piled up. The cult itself proved harder to touch. Every lead the police chased dissolved into dead ends, accounts wiped clean, websites taken offline, usernames vanishing overnight. The Serpents of Night had existed in the shadows long before Michael found them, and they knew how to disappear. To the police, they were ghosts. Claire never returned to the house. She stayed with a friend in another city, unable to shake the feeling that someone might be watching. Reporters swarmed her for weeks, but she avoided the cameras, checking only once to say she believed the cult was still active. She admitted she still woke some nights convinced she could hear the faint tapping of a keyboard, as if Michael were just downstairs, still communicating with him. Michael never spoke about the cult in court. He sat through the proceedings with the same cold detachment he'd shown that night, his eyes forward unblinking. The jury found him guilty on all major charges, but even as he was led away, there was a hint of something in his expression, not defeat but quiet satisfaction. It was as if the conviction itself didn't matter, as if in his mind he had already completed the offering they demanded.